Hey, what is going on YouTube? In today's video, we're going into AWS, and in this case, we're going to highlight a use case for automating using a Lambda function to shut down your EC2 instances. Now, the reason why this can be useful for those that are learning in a lab environment, let's say you forget to shut down your EC2 instance. Granted, it's not going to be much if you're just running a simple T2, T1 micro or something like that, but in the case that you do leave it running for an extended period of time, you could define this within a Lambda function to shut this down automatically. In my case, I have it shut down every night at 5 o'clock because most times I'm labbing throughout the day when I am using this particular lab. So I have it shut down after 5 o'clock. And that's what we're going to cover today. And that's all going to be using a Lambda function, Amazon Event Bridge to schedule it, kind of similar to a cron job, and then EC2 instances. So with that being said, let's get right into the video. All right, so for the very first step, you're going to head over to Lambda, and we're going to create a new Lambda function. So in here, you're going to go to create function. We're going to leave the option author from scratch. We're going to change this name. We're going to say CyberMe EC2 Shutdown. We're going to change the runtime to Python, and we're going to leave it the architecture here, and then we're going to leave everything else default. So go ahead, hit create function. All right, so the next step, we're going to head over back to the top, and we're going to go ahead and search EC2. I'm not going to create a new EC2 instance for this as I already have one running for this lab, but for those that are not or do not have one running, go down to launch instance, click on launch instance. In here, go ahead, name your instance, go ahead, select an AMI or an image. So in my case, I did Ubuntu, and I left this default, did a T2 micro. For this particular use case, you don't need a key pair. You could just leave it default, or you go ahead and create a new key pair if you're going to use this for other labs. Network settings, again, you could leave this by default, and you could pretty much leave everything else by default, because the point of this lab is we're just highlighting how you can use the Lambda function to shut this down. So in this case, you would just go ahead and create launch instance. Once you're back at the instances screen, you're going to get an instance ID. This you need to take note of. So go ahead, grab that, and copy that down into your notepad. The next thing that you want to do is go ahead, and we're going to have to create a role for our Lambda function. Now, the reason why we have to do this is that we want to give the appropriate permissions for our Lambda function to be able to shut down this EC2 instance. By default, the Lambda function will not have that ability to do so. So we're going to head over to IAM. As you can see, I already have a custom policy called custom EC2 night shutdown. But again, I will walk you through this so you can do it yourself. You're going to go to create policy, and then very simply, what you could do, especially in a lab environment, use your tools wisely, open up your ChatGPT. This is the free version. I already have something that I want to bring up in a minute, but go ahead and let's go ahead and ask ChatGPT to generate you a policy allowing the Lambda function to start and stop EC2 instances. So we're going to do exactly that. All right, so I said create AWS policy for Lambda function to allow start and stop of EC2 instances using JSON format. Here it gives us a little brief explanation, and then we have our JSON right here. So if we go back to the one that is already created. Oh, before we do that, I'll just show you how you finish this one out. So you're going to click on the JSON tab, and then in there, go ahead and remove the default JSON, and then paste what we had just got from ChatGPT, and then go ahead, click next after you had finished out the, we'll just do it so we get to the next screen real quick. And then once you're on the next screen, go ahead, do policy name, enter a description if you would like. And that is pretty much it at this point. And then go ahead and create policy. So just to highlight, if we go back to the one that's already in use, if we go over to JSON, I do have something a little bit different here as well for the logs. But in this case, again, for the EC2 start and stop, this is what we have right here. EC2 start and stop, and the resource is a star, allowing for all, and the effect is allow, which is what we have from ChatGPT. In this case, we would have to adjust this. This is just giving us an example. I should have made note of that. And it probably will say that in here. Yeah, right here. So allowing control over all EC2 instances. So if we wanted to go back, we could get, again, the ARN for the EC2 instance. But in this case, for the lab, we could do resource star. So definitely keep note of that, as it does do note here. And then you could ask GPT to adjust that for you. Simply, all you have to say is adjust JSON to allow access to all EC2 instances. And as you can see, we now have a similar JSON format to what we have over here. We have start and then the star. Again, you could use ChatGPT. And then it breaks it down here. So let's say we had another one, EC2 stop VPC endpoint, service private DNS verification. Given the star, it gives us all that. Again, this is not necessary for this lab. I just want to highlight the usefulness of using GPT to get information quickly, especially when you are in a learning environment. All right, so once we have created our policy and we had allowed EC2 start and stop, the next thing that you want to do is you want to assign this policy to our role. We didn't create a role. The role has been created for us. That is because when we created the Lambda function, we just did it by default. So you could have done it differently. You could have created a role and then created a policy, but in this case, we just did it by default and then we allowed it to create us a role for us. So if we go over to our roles and we type in custom, you'll see that we have custom EC2 night shutdown, and that is the role. Sorry, I'm getting confused with my other one. So if I type in cyber, here's our CyberMe EC2 shutdown role. So now let's click on that role, and what we want to do is attach that policy to this role. So go to add permissions and create attached policies, and then we're just going to go ahead and search that role. If I could remember to search it correctly. Oh wait, I didn't create one, so we're using the same policy that I just done. You will find yours. So if you named yours custom EC2 night shutdown, go ahead and then find that and then click on add permissions. So now at this point, for this role that was created by default by Lambda, we have a AWS Lambda basic execution role, and then we have our custom EC2 night shutdown role. All right, so now we're going to head back over to our Lambda function. So we're in our Lambda function, and then if we refresh this page and we go over to configuration, we go to permissions, we should now see we have an go over to the right one, configuration, permissions, and you should now see that we have our EC2 policy attached. So now at this point, what we have to do is we are going to go into our code and we're going to generate some code here. I already have some drafted up, so let's go over to my other function so I could just kind of walk you through it. And then we will use, again, ChatGPT to make it even better. Again, just highlighting the usefulness of using AI. So let's go over to EC2 night shutdown, go into code, and here's the code that I currently use. It's pretty straightforward. We have the import. This is importing the Boto3 library in order for allowing us to interact with Python and AWS. And then we're going to set up our session. This is not necessary on how this is done. You could do it differently. You could define this directly through importing the library. But in this case, we defined our region name US East 1. And then we defined our instances. Now this is the instance that we had wrote down in our notebook earlier. So definitely you want to keep note of that and you want to paste that here. This is creating a list. So if we had multiple instances, we can go ahead and put it inside of our brackets and we will have multiple instances to iterate through. Now in this case, we have instances. We had defined one value in that list. And then we want to create our client. To do that, we're going to define a variable EC2. This could be whatever you would like. And then you want to do Boto3 for the library, the client function, and then we're going to define EC2. And then in here, we're going to pass through EC2. And then we have our Lambda handler. You could ignore this. This is not really necessary for this lab. What this would do is it would pass through information depending on how this Lambda function was executed. In this case, we are executing it through Event Bridge, and the information that is provided is not necessary. And then we have some context. Again, this is going to be an empty in this use case. So the next line, we have EC2, which is what we had defined earlier. And we're creating pretty much referencing this function here within this object, if you will. So EC2 stop instances. And then we're going to define or pass through our instances. We're going to pass through our instances through instances IDs. And we're saying that instances IDs equals instances. And then we're just going to print out a simple statement saying stop your instances string instances. I'm saying that too much now. But with that being said, that's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy. What we want to do though is, again, we want to use ChatGPT. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this information and open up ChatGPT. Actually, and I will just scroll up because I already had done it before, just to kind of get this lab moving for the sake of time. So I just said, I want the, so I posted the code up above. I said, how can I refine this code to be up to standard? And then it kind of gave some information here. So it gave some code. The one thing I didn't like about this code that I had provided is it pretty much used the event parameter to get the instances IDs. In this case, we are not passing through any instances. So what I had asked it next is I said, I want the instance to be hard-coded as it is not being passed through EventBridge. And it says, obviously, if it's not being passed through dynamically, then the function can be further refined, blah, 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 blah. And pretty much what we have in the last one, but it has some additional functions, including a try and except block to handle errors, and then some logging for us. So pretty much the same thing, but it's just cool. Again, we're using ChatGPT to generate our code. So if we go ahead and copy this, this code has not been tested before, but I do think it would work just based on what I'm seeing here. And let's go over and paste it into our EC2 night shutdown, and then make sure everything is in there. All right, looks good to me. So go ahead and click on deploy. You will get deployment successful. You also get a nice green banner here at the top saying successfully updated the function EC2 night shutdown. And last but not least, what we need to set up a schedule within EventBridge. And what that is, for those that are not familiar with it, it is similar to what you would do in cron job. So search event bridge on the left hand side, click on schedules, and then in here, as you can see, I already have one set up. So if we click on that, you'll kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. So we have 20 minutes and 16. So every day at 14:20 is when this script will execute. And here we will have our target. So the target is EC2 night shutdown, which is a Lambda function, service Lambda, and we are using the invoke API. And here's the target ARN and the execution role, which was assigned by default. So let's go ahead and we'll do that real quick. So let's go to create schedule, CyberMe. So we're going to do a schedule name. We're going to do a reoccurring schedule, and we're going to do America, New York. In this case, we want to do the time. We'll do 8:56. Oh, what am I doing? This will be 56. And then we want to do hours. So pretty much what this means is that it will run every hour at 56 minutes every day of the month, every month, and every day of the week. And then you could do a flexible time window here, and you could obviously do a start date, but that's really it. We'll turn this off. Oh, and we're forgetting year. Sorry, I left the question mark there, so we just redid it. I ran out of time. So 58 star 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 question mark star, and it kind of gives you an idea of the next 10 trigger dates. So February 5th at 20:58, 21:58, 22:58. So pretty much every hour at the 58th minute, this script or this schedule will execute. So go ahead, click on next, and then in here we want to go ahead and find invoke for Lambda, and then we're going to select our CyberMe EC2 Shutdown Lambda function, and then we're going to click on next. We have some additional options here. We have enable schedule. Obviously, we're going to leave that enabled. Action after schedule completion. You have some things to delete, or you could just say none. Now we have some retry policies. Just leave it by default, and here at the very bottom, we're just going to allow it to create a new role for this schedule. Click on next, and then we're just going to scroll down to the bottom at the verify and click on create schedule. All right, so now at this point we have everything set up. So we have the appropriate permissions for our Lambda function as we had defined in a policy, and attach that to a role, and that role was created by our when we created the Lambda function. And then we have set up an event bridge that will go ahead and execute or invoke that Lambda function. So at 20:58, which is exactly 1 minute from now, we should be able to see CyberMe EC2 instance shutting down. And as you can see, it is currently shutting down, and the time is now, I don't know what the time would be on here. And as you can see, Eastern time zone is 9:01, which is currently where this is running out of. The only thing that I had to do differently, which it wouldn't matter if you follow my directions, is I realized I paused the video for a second, I realized that I pasted my code in my other function. So when it had executed the first time at 9:58 or 8:58, it did not execute, is because it was calling this function and it still had the default code. So once I just pasted this in here, everything worked as it should. And that's going to close out today's video. So in this video, we created a Lambda function that automated the shutdown of our EC2 instance. Now the use case and the reason behind this is because it allows you to have an automated fashion in shutting down your EC2 instance in order to save you money. So at the end of the day, at the end of your lab session, if you do forget to shut down your EC2, you could obviously use the same methods for other services. Maybe instead of stopping, you could delete, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, your EC2 instance will be shut down and you will not be charged for that runtime. And in this video, we went over Event Bridge. We created a Lambda function. We had created a policy and assigned it to a role. And that's pretty much everything we have done in this video. We also used ChatGPT to help generate some code, talk about a few things if you weren't familiar with different terms and methods. And the reason why I want to keep doing that going forward is that I do think AI is a tool that everybody should be using. So I'm just going to throw it in there as how I would use it, just so you guys get an idea on how you could use it. Now that's going to close out today's video. I hope you were able to take something away. And as always, never stop learning.